Sean, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So, Sean, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today.
Well, it's an interesting backstory, but the long and short of it is simple. I've been doing sales development stuff for something like 10 years now. It all seems like a blur, but really, I started off as an SDR, sales development representative, back in the day. This was in 2015. Before that, I was even doing kind of related work, but it was quite, let's say, a fast moving path for me, just because from getting that foundation as an SDR, I developed really quickly into a position where I was helping another startup at the time. This is when I was living in Portland, Oregon, develop their own sales development program. And then for the better part of almost 7 years, I got into consulting. And so I had the ability to kind of create architectures for something like 30 different startups. And that involves so many things that we're going to talk about today. But basically, I've been living and breathing sales development. That's actually, of course, how we met Ashley, through a mutual client of ours. So it's been a whirlwind. There's a lot that has changed in the industry, and we'll have a chance to talk about some of that stuff today.
Wonderful. And now you have your own company in consulting now, right? Tell me a little bit more about that.
I do a Bloom Consulting. It is my baby. Again, it's the culmination of the better part of 10 years of experience where I love being a part of, as I put it, different families. And I know that there's like this perception of fractionality as being in some circles inherently negative, partially because so many folks have had bad experiences with consultants. But for me, I like the challenge and, frankly, the all of the fun benefits of working for different clients. I mentioned before that I've worked for more than 30 startups, and my work is very hands-on. So similar to event production, which I know is your forte, Ashley. I I lived and breathed this stuff from the bottom up. So I've done everything from pressing buttons in Salesforce because records aren't mapped properly to the actual fun and, let's say, art of cold calling. And so I do it all. I own it all. Bloom Consulting is really, again, my baby. It's sales development. It's revenue operations as well. I am a bit of a nerd when it comes to tooling and all parts of the stack. So I'm just excited to help teams out because this is a hard thing to get right. There's a ton beneath the iceberg that has to go almost perfectly for you to be able to source business. So I love it. I love the people that I work with. And again, that's partially why we're talking today, because that's how I met you.
Yeah. Let's dive a little bit deeper into what sales development means because I think a lot of people understand the words and what SDR
Mm.
means within their organization and how they use it. But I feel that part of what you're doing is taking it to the next level with your company because just like with events, there's an efficiency, there are nuances, there's a lot that come with actual experience and application that maybe even some leadership managers don't necessarily understand sometimes. And you're trying to change that a little bit, I feel like.
I and for me, it's not so much swimming upstream. It's more so just trying to be conscious of the ecosystem that I live in. Because similar to whether it's marketing, whether it's engineering, product, whatever those functional departments are, sales development does not exist in a silo. And I think this is one of the most important lessons of this function. There's a lot of call it assumptions about the placement of sales development in the organization. Oftentimes it's seen as an entry level kind of department or field of focus. But at the end of the day, what I'm trying to do is take what your product is, translate that into how individuals who never heard of your company, never heard of your product, or maybe they have, how they understand what problems that product solves. And then, as you can imagine, I need to, as a sales development leader, connect the dots between the physical people making those dials or sending those emails right on back to the sales function, yes, the product function, even the engineering function. It is. It's all hands on deck. It's an ecosystem. When it goes wrong, it can tank a company because we're talking about the leading edge of your company's growth. Frankly, if you don't have enough people learning about your product, that's going to be a problem when you're trying to hit those very aggressive goals. So, for me, sales development is not just quote unquote generating leads, even though that, of course, is for the most part our intended results. It's about going to market in a way that maximizes your ability to grow and, frankly, do that in a way that de risks what is a fundamental need to have for your business. So a lot of my focus is on how to understand, as I put it, the laws of physics of sales development. So taking all those learnings from those years of experience and applying them in a way where I can make educated guesses. Like going into a project, I have a pretty deep sense of what success might look like. But kind of what you're alluding to there, Ashley, as well, is sometimes that takes a little bit of education because a lot of folks have maybe touched sales development in the past. I hear this from all the time from sales leaders, the quote unquote, I managed an SDR team in the past, but oftentimes what we find is it's more surface level than what is needed to be successful in this day and age.
Okay, so you brought up a couple different things right there that like bring up for me from the event side. Well, and everything like dominoes into everything else, right? Like no matter what type of business you're in, what type of event it is or whatever, like lead generation and sales and all the different departments, to your point, have to work quite connectively to make any lead successful, right? So a lot of times in events, what we see is we get sponsors or exhibitors who come in and want to generate leads, get scans, do all these things. And it's one of the things that I've watched over the years that I would love to figure out a better method for, because just because you get scans and leads does not translate into any type of ROI, right? So if you don't have the team, once you get back to your office and they can process those, or you have a foundation of what to do with those or how to filter through them and all that fun stuff, then it really doesn't work, right? And or you brought up like a lot of different maybe departments or people don't understand the product in full. So that kind of cross-departmental training of what your product is, what it can do for you, and making sure that the end client really understands it as well. There's been plenty of times where I've been on our sponsors or exhibitors websites and be like, what do you do? Like, I don't know what you do and how it solves my problem. Right. Which, it's not their fault. There's sometimes it's hard to explain what you do, right, to the masses, because everybody's a little bit different. Everybody has a little different problem to solve. Everybody has a little different need. But I think what you bring up is highly important because the domino effect of all of it equals results, right? Like if you don't do it right and you don't put the proper foundation in place, then you can crash your business.
We see it happen all the time, unfortunately. And I think the leaders who understand this most deeply can almost see the 3D puzzle of how all of these parts fit together. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense if you just, from a 30,000-foot level, consider what it takes to get any sort of business off the ground. You need a product to sell, you need to know how to sell it, and you need to know how to evangelize it. And what I love about the event business, so the work that you do, is there's such a strong parallel to all of the themes that touch sales development. In fact, one of the strongest, call it campaigns from a sales development perspective, is leveraging events in order to source interest. There's a handoff, there's a handshake involved between the marketing or events department that puts on these events and sales development itself. Long story short, you might buy a sponsorship at a major conference. Well, you might get an attendee list, or you might not. You need to figure out how to activate those leads in a genuine way rather than just, giving something away at the booth and expecting that to turn into closed business. There is a playbook to all of this. I mentioned this before. I love this phrase, the law of physics, of outbound, of sales development, of go to market. You can't cheat those. And at the end of the day, you need to reach out to the right people at the right time with the right message and have that be a foundation to your growth. If you don't do those things effectively, then chances are you're not going to be successful.
Okay, a quick on the spot question for you of personal opinion on if you were to buy a sponsorship at an event, would you recommend that you have someone from each department, an engineer, someone from marketing, from sales, whatnot? Who do you have at your booth to make that successful? Because I think that's a really big challenge for some teams. Not everybody can get out. Sometimes it's laid just on the marketing department, but they're not part of sales. Like, what would you recommend if you could say the top like 3 or 4 people that you need in your booth at any event? What would you say?
First of all, you kind of have to know your audience. So there are, of course, technical products that I've developed architecture for from a sales development perspective. Those folks go into those events. Engineers love to be educated. In fact, one of the aspects of SaaS that have impressed me the most is to see the culture of engineering. That's just one example where the person at the booth, hopefully your sales team is able to have technical conversations. So in those cases, it's incredibly helpful to have someone who's incredibly technical and knowledgeable, partially because, yeah, they can answer questions, but partially because selfishly, I can do things with that. So I can say things to prospects before the event like, hey, this person who's a really trusted resource in your aspect of work is going to be at the booth. They're going to be at the event. Would you love to grab some time with them? Almost like a coffee chat kind of thing. The way I view this is simple. It's who are the people showing up? How can you convince them that their time is best spent doing something with you? And what does that look like? Engineering love talking shop. They love talking to technical folks about technical things. If I'm selling a non-technical product, then the equation is a bit different. The way I would sell to salespeople at a conference would be a lot different. It wouldn't be technical per se. You would have to have folks there who are more known for being able to speak that language. Again, this is psychology, it's sociology, it's human relationships, but it's also activating that. And I gave you one example of like, okay, technical event, I want someone who I can advertise as being worthy of the attendees' time to schedule a calendared invite or to show up to the booth and have a deep conversation. There has to be a hook that's genuine, I think, with events as a theme. That's why events themselves, I truly believe, are one of the most powerful campaigns sales development can run because they're so genuine. But you have to do that in a way that's not overly superficial. So whatever speaks to the audience, however you can sell it, frankly, before the event even happens to get them excited about showing up to the booth. It's not just about how pretty the booth is. It's not just about some of the more superficial aspects of the event itself. It's like physically, what can they get out of it by being there and by being at your booth?
So what I hear a little bit is partially is the advanced research, right? Researching your audience, researching the customer type you want, being very defined on some of those verticals. And then also making sure that your whoever shows up is kind of cross departmentally trained so that they can answer things no matter what question they get, or be able to on the fly really make sure that they schedule an appointment with somebody. Are kind of the takeaways I took from that.
Absolutely. And you know what? Again, it really depends on the format of event. It depends a lot on the size of the event. It can depend a lot on your budget. Some events themselves, it might not be a paid sponsorship. It might be even some more, let's say, guerrilla tactics that are employed around the event. So I think we both know companies, founders, individuals who would say something like, hey, this huge event, like, for example, Salesforce Dreamforce is going on. Meet me down the street. We rented out this cool bar, and I would love to have you come for a happy hour. Just remember, fundamentally, it does have to be genuine. I said the word calendar invite. That would scare a lot of people away. You have to be very tasteful and mindful with this. If it feels kind of gross and salesy, then your prospects might not respond well. I think one of the best things you can do at an event is generate that goodwill with prospects that, yes, you can activate after the event. So again, you kind of have to navigate that very artfully and tactfully. But if you do that correctly, you're developing long-term relationships that have a multiplier effect beyond what I would be able to do just reaching out cold without the power of an in-person activity.
I'm glad you brought that up because I think I talked about this on another podcast, and I talk about it with potential clients all the time, is some of these events that happen as ancillary to the main event that's going on. I feel like there's a few like companies out there, startups specifically, that don't quite understand how much they can actually damage their brand and their sales by doing it wrong, right? Like it's not just a matter of just having a happy hour. Like if something goes awry with whatever you're doing at your event, that's what's going to be remembered, and that's going to be connected to your brand forever, or for at least a good period of time. And that in itself can be more damaging than you would ever know. So I think that people need to put some good thought into their strategy. And even at times I've told people that I can talk a client out of an event very easily, because if I don't feel, to your point, that it's authentic and real and it's gonna actually do some good and that you're gonna spend your money wisely, I will be the first one to tell you not to do it. Even though that's my business, right? Like that's how I make my money, but I don't like watching people do bad things. So let's dive a little deeper into the actual sales development process. What does that look like kind of from start to finish for a new client for you?
Yeah, and it's worth acknowledging that the companies I work with start from different stages of
Mm.
sales development. So some folks have actual existing SDR teams. Some folks have a founder-led sales motion with no sales development function. Maybe that founder literally is sending emails through their own persona. Whatever your starting point is, though, I think the challenges are fairly similar and pretty much the same. Fundamentally, you have to get a few things right. I kind of denote four in particular that you should really think long and hard about before you even send your first email or touch through whatever channel that might be out. So the first is your ICP, your ideal customer profile. Who are you reaching out to? Now, here's what's interesting. A, a lot of teams that I've worked with will be able to articulate, generally speaking, who their product is made for. So, if it is a technical product, you can imagine that those products might be made for engineers. It's pretty simple. It's like technical thing, technical folks use it, got it done. But what I often find is, partially through my own pattern recognition, but partially just by going one layer deeper and asking yourself the second piece of this, which is, yeah, who matters? So who's physically using the product, who's buying your product, but also why should they care? And that why should they care piece matters a lot, because I can be creating a product for engineers to use, and they care about certain things, again, that are obvious. It's if your product's helping them code faster or better and more efficiently, then you can sell that to an engineer. You can say, hey, I can make your world easier and better. Amazing, use my product. That doesn't mean you're going to grow from a sales perspective. What if that technical product, in making engineers more productive, doing their stuff faster, actually helps you sell more as someone who's in a different department? So let's say by making those engineers do something faster, you're able to, as it could be, I'm making this up, a CFO, yeah, a CEO, certainly a CRO, they might care about this stuff too, because at the end of the day, they benefit from that same thing. So if you're selling a product that makes engineers more productive, well, if I'm on the product team, I kind of care a lot about that. If I'm trying to develop a product in which there's a lot of innovation occurring, I'm thinking about AI products in particular, there are a lot of department heads who might care about that. Who is your buying circle? Who are you selling to and what do they care about? I, when I craft these outbound campaigns, oftentimes am not selling to one persona, I'm selling to many. And that's something a lot of leaders, even if they've done this before, even if they've done it at their own company, might not understand that 3D puzzle of. And then once you figure out who cares about your product and why they care about your product, um, you have to figure out what sort of tactics you're using. And this is where it becomes very complex very quickly. Anyone who goes on LinkedIn and searches a topic of sales development is going to see an eye-watering amount of tools. There's kind of like this exponentially increasing amount of tools that do everything from a sales development perspective. A lot of the sexy ones are AI driven, which of course is one of those topics we might get into in this conversation. But fundamentally, you need to know how to reach out to these people and do that in a way that doesn't break anything. So I mentioned laws of physics before. You try to send 1,000 emails out today on a brand new domain, guarantee that domain's going to get shut down. You have to get this right, and you have to understand what the limitations of this are. So how many emails can you feasibly send out? How many phone calls can an average sales development representative make reasonably without them literally losing their minds? And then finally, last thing that really matters a lot is once you figure all of that, call it pre-work out, just to summarize those 4 things that matter. So once you figure out who your ICP is, once you figure out why they care about your product, once you figure out how you're reaching out to them, so what your tactics are, then you have to figure out, once you start doing those things, how do you make the process more efficient and iterate? So this becomes an interesting topic of, okay, if my conversion rate was 2% this week against my list of 100 prospects, how do I make that marginally better week over week? So a lot of this is reinforcement and iteration, remembering that oftentimes these are people, salespeople reaching out, sales development representatives. They're human beings. They are not marketing platforms. You need motivation. You need culture on your team as well. All of these things matter. If you get one wrong or one not so right, it could tank the entire function. So there's a lot that you have to consider. That is why it is important to invest in expertise, because if you don't, you'll miss something that matters a lot.
Yeah. Now you and I are partnering up, and we can't release it yet, but you and I are partnering up with a potential new consulting client on helping them do several different things. Multiple things. They're not a startup, but they are they're reverting back to startup mode for the moment, to get back on track. But one of the things that we talked about with them was making sure that they understood, to your point, their customer base, right? Like they've already got existing customers, and to now do our job to go out and help them lead gen and do events and all these things, that we need to understand their current customer base and what they like, what they don't like, all of those things. Which brings me into kind of the next question is, what are those kind of metrics in sales development, that like teams should be tracking to feel like they're being successful or not, and when to know to like alter your plan should you not be successful?
I think one of the call it context levels that is missed when we discuss metrics is understanding it's not just about what you already did, it's understanding what important baselines of success are. And again, to continue this theme of laws of physics, if I know that in sending 1,000 emails out, I'm going to get shut down, I need to upfront, before I start sending anything, develop a reasonable bumper in the bowling alley, if you will, for what kind of stuff I can get away with and how to maximize each one of those activities. So, part of the discussion around metrics can drive me crazy, frankly, because oftentimes we hear this from folks more so on the marketing side because their world often exists through the lens of turning on and off campaigns. It's a little bit different. In fact, it can be a lot different from, again, salespeople doing this. So it's not just about those things that matter, which are more after you send that stuff out. So what were the open rates of an email campaign? What were the reply rates? Doing sentiment analysis to figure out what percentage of your replies were positive or negative. It's how many total contacts have I engaged against how many accounts? What's the average number of people per account? It's what is your burn rate for your entire addressable market? That's something a lot of folks miss. And at the end of the day, when it comes to metrics, talking about this 3D puzzle, this ecosystem of how departments can play well together, I don't just want to have an understanding of how many meetings I'm sourcing, which from a sales development perspective is oftentimes our goal. Our North Star goal is how many qualified conversations are we sourcing for the sales team. I need to plug that into a model that connects to, that interfaces with the closing side, so the account executive side. What is your average sales price? Therefore, how many meetings do I actually have to source, knowing that could be 25-30% of those folks no-show, partially because no-show rates when you're calling people, the channel that can get you the most success these days, has a higher no-show rate than email. I have a model, like an actual physical, ugly ass spreadsheet that I created,
Of
but is
course you
super
do.
effective.
Of course
Yes,
you
I do. But that matters. And it starts from literally, again, what is my addressable market? How many thousands of accounts can I engage? How many individuals who are part of my ideal customer profile can I reach out to? And then it's the law of physics. Sending per inbox something like 30 new emails a day for a total of 150, no more than 150 total emails sent per inbox. How many calls am I making? And then that ladders right on down to the number of meetings that are sourced. And then I apply the closing side, so the bottom of the funnel metrics, to understand what the average close rate is, what your average sales price is, and then you have to extrapolate that out over time. So this stuff, it's part art, the art being understanding, generally speaking, that last bit of our discussion. So, what tactics work? What are the baseline success rates? But it's also a hell of a lot of science because you need to be on top of what some of those, yes, actual metrics are. So, if I call 1,200 people or make 1,200 dials this week and I only get 10 conversations out of that, that is a leading edge problem that will factor in to everything that happens downstream. So it's actuals, which are those fun numbers that happen the month before you can put into that spreadsheet or that model, but it's also the predictive future stuff and being able to see around cliffs, things that are kind of obvious, but you need to think about. The holidays are coming up. What does that mean for your ability to close business at the end of the year? It's a lot. Again, 3D puzzle. But if you think about that first bit of the laws of physics of what those predictive variables are, you'll probably be okay and not grossly blue sky your team, which is important.